Oh, hi there. I was just perusing the wonderful selection of products on offer from SkyMall, America's favorite store. Which I guess is a thing you can kind of just say. For over 25 years, the SkyMall shopping catalog occupied the back seats of almost every major American airline in the country, nestled right in between other aviation mainstays like the barf bag, used Band-Aid, and the pamphlet that teaches you how to die with dignity. Want a life-sized Yeti for your garden? How about a helmet to regrow your hair? Or maybe a watch? A watch that tells you when you're going to die. Well, if you answered no to all of these things, you're certainly not alone. In fact, the most enticing part of SkyMall was figuring out who in God's name was actually buying any of this junk, let alone 30,000 feet in the air. But that was kind of part of its allure. For almost 25 years, SkyMall's business of selling obscure novelty products to airline passengers netted well over $100 million in annual revenue and reached over 650 million passengers a year, making it not only a household name in aviation, but in pop culture as a whole.
The SkyMall, give me the SkyMall, would you?
I ordered a bunch of crap off SkyMall.
How about a Greg Norman executive putter from the SkyMall?
I got it all from SkyMall. I'm hooked on that catalog.
And honestly, that's what this video was going to be about. Seriously, guys, this was supposed to be a fun one. I was going to focus on the origins of SkyMall, their business model, and all of the strange and wacky products they had to offer. But I scrapped it. Pretty much the entire script, actually. Because what I ended up learning about the downfall of SkyMall ended up being so much weirder than anything they ever sold. Now, if you're familiar with the company, then you might be able to take an educated guess as to why they went bankrupt. Eventually, with the rise of smartphones on planes, people just weren't browsing SkyMall's catalog anymore. And with retail giants like Amazon cornering the vast majority of e-commerce, SkyMall's business model had started to become kind of obsolete. And that really should have been the whole story. But it wasn't. Not even close, actually. In fact, it was the specific way SkyMall went bankrupt, the scandals that surrounded them, and the very sketchy parent company they were eventually acquired by that takes what should have been a run-of-the-mill downfall story and turns it into a very strange and somewhat disturbing ordeal. And you can believe me when I say that, because I get nasally when I'm excited. In fact, this story's so bizarre that by the end of it, I didn't really get all the answers I wanted. And it's for this exact reason that I can't even guarantee you a satisfying ending. But what I can tell you is, this gets weird. So buckle up. Alright, let's start with some context. In the early 90s, SkyMall's strange in-flight catalog of novelty products was actually a very clever answer to a specific desire in the retail market. Before the internet went on to make novelty infinitely accessible, there was a time when customers had a real appetite to be shown products they had never seen before, things that the neighbors didn't have. And this paved the way for an entirely new genre of retail. Companies like The Sharper Image, Hallmarker Schlemmer, and eventually SkyMall all built their entire business models around selling the most obscure novelty items they could find. And this led to some really interesting retail experiences.
This is Go Ball. Creative name, eh? A plastic bowling ball with an electric motor which makes it revolve.
Oh wow, a remote control bowling ball. Stupid, useless, but charming nonetheless.
The waterfall is $475, but do not attempt to put the pet guppies in here.
Ahahaha, very neat. Surely this would be the talk of any outstanding dinner party.
Not everything requires batteries, and this ping pong table for midgets is...
Okay, so while SkyMall may not have had their own storefront, what they did have was arguably even better. And that was unimpeded, front row access to one of the most unsuspectingly lucrative demographics in retail. The modern airline passenger. It seemed like when customers were shown products of a strange and novel nature, they were much more likely to purchase them when they were in the air, Which doesn't surprise me. There's something about the idea of flying, where one is not at home, yet also not at their destination, that allows your mind to dream, if only for a moment, that you did in fact own that self-cleaning cat litter robot. Even with the full knowledge that you don't even own a cat. Okay, it wasn't that romantic. I mean, if you've ever flipped through a SkyMall catalog, then you're probably well aware they sold a lot of junk. A lot of wine mom core. A lot of divorced dad core. But from the 90s to the 2000s, the SkyMall catalog was a quintessential part of the flying experience. But, as with most stories involving print media, it didn't really end well. By the early 10s, with more and more passengers choosing to pass the time with their phones, sales from SkyMall began to plummet, forcing the company to pivot a huge portion of their business away from their catalog. By 2013, over 2/3 of SkyMall's revenue was now being generated from a completely separate loyalty business that was, to be honest, really boring and not half as exciting as selling whatever in God's name this is. Besides, this new venture wasn't nearly strong enough to save the company. And with catalog sales continuing to decline year over year, SkyMall was looking like they were headed towards a pretty definite bankruptcy. But then, right at the cusp of SkyMall's darkest hour, a savior emerged. A company of incredible proportions. And they wanted to merge with SkyMall. And it's right around here that things started to get really, really weird. In 2013, SkyMall was approached by the Xhibit Corporation, an up-and-coming software company that boasted an impressive portfolio of products and a fancy $300 million valuation. Now for SkyMall, this must have looked like a godsend. After all, Xhibit was a tech-oriented company and would be the perfect match to help launch SkyMall's archaic business model into the new age. Not to mention, the company's insane valuation looked really impressive to investors as well. So, where could one hope to invest in such an established and promising-looking company? The New York Stock Exchange? Maybe the NASDAQ? No. In 2013, Xhibit Corp was trading on the OTCBB, which was a system mostly reserved for trading risky penny stocks. Oh, and they also used some really sketchy tactics to get themselves listed in the first place. Finance people, pause here if you're interested. But it gets weirder. In fact, when you actually take the time to look at Xhibit a little closer, you start to wonder why a company as big and reputable as SkyMall ever got involved with them in the first place. On the surface, Xhibit marketed themselves as a cloud-based software company, boasting a glossy, sleek website and a suite of exciting digital products. But you barely have to dig to realize that the vast majority of it is vaporware. Either half the products that Xhibit boasts about were never really launched, and the ones that supposedly did never reported any meaningful revenue. For example, TwitYap, the most exclusive social network. Well, it must have been pretty damn exclusive because no one ever used it. For 3 whole years, their website just sat parked as a vague coming soon page until it eventually turned into what looks to be a directory for knockoff luxury handbags. Because of course it did. This is so obviously the natural life cycle for sketchy shit like this. What else we got? Ooh, Movie Social. Ever notice how there's no movie app that integrates social media with the movie ticketing experience? We noticed too. And there still isn't, because I could find no evidence of this ever existing in any capacity. Alright, so from the looks of it, it also seems like Xhibit dabbled in mobile gaming as well. Or at least tried to. Their website advertises one game called Running Caveman, which looks to be one of those endless runner clones. Get ready for the run of your life. Ooh, bad copy. Show the world what you're made of as Bob Botato? What the fuck? Bounce through enchanted forest. Sprint through molten lava. And never let your guard down. Wow, okay, remember folks, 2013. No AI here, just raw, unfiltered human brain power. For fans of icicles, the frozen... For fans of icicle? Okay, we're done. So, by the looks of the gameplay, it does seem like a real game was made. But as to whether people actually played it is anyone's guess. I don't know, let's check the comments. This is fucking stupid, and so is your fake company. Alright, so I think it's pretty clear by now that Xhibit wasn't really selling much software. And I think Priceonomics puts it pretty aptly when they describe Xhibit as more of a parody of a tech company than a real company at all. But if Xhibit wasn't actually a successful software company, then how were they making money? What could they have possibly been selling to deserve their $300 million valuation and a majority share in SkyMall? Well, if you've been following along, you might just be able to guess. In fact, let's say it together. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Weight loss supplements and colon cleansers. Jinx, you owe me a soda. And this wasn't going well for Xhibit. Turns out the vast majority of the company's health products were lacking proper quality and safety certifications, resulting in a slew of bad business that eventually placed Xhibit in serious financial trouble. And this info is not hard to find, by the way. I mean, the company just kind of admits to all of this in their annual report for 2012. So, with all this being said, it's probably pretty easy to tell why this was kind of weird. You see, on the surface, Xhibit was an up-and-coming tech company with an impressive portfolio of products and an absurd valuation. And they looked pretty legit. These guys had an office. They had employees. They had cringy workplace Nerf gun battles. But only a couple years prior, Xhibit was a financially unstable nutraceutical company that sold poorly manufactured colon cleansers on the internet. So what was really going on here? Well, one random internet user thought he had a clue. Enter Isaac Silberman, a user on the Seeking Alpha Finance website and a former business analyst who kind of has a killer track record for sniffing out suspicious companies. In his article, Isaac reveals evidence which suggests that Xhibit Corp could have potentially pivoted themselves into a tech company in order to build hype for a, quote, sophisticated pump and dump scheme. Now look, Isaac uses a lot of complicated analysis to support his accusation, but it's his investigation into some of Xhibit's shareholders that really sparked my interest. In his thesis, Silberman reveals that multiple insiders within the Xhibit Corporation had once held shares in multiple sketchy penny stocks and pump and dump schemes, including the company's very own CFO. So all of this begs the question, why on earth would SkyMall, a reputable and once prosperous company, merge with a shady, overvalued tech business whose only significant source of revenue came from selling colon cleansers? Well, there's a couple possible scenarios. One is bad, and the other is so much worse. Scenario 1. SkyMall was tricked. Technically, there's a reality where SkyMall failed to do their homework and genuinely believed Xhibit was an up-and-coming tech company that was truly worth its absurd valuation. Which is kind of hard to believe. I mean, the info on Xhibit's past is really not hard to find. And if a bunch of journalists and bloggers on the internet could figure it out, you'd think SkyMall would have uncovered Xhibit's sketchy history through routine due diligence. Which brings us to scenario 2. The worst one. In this scenario, maybe SkyMall knew all about Xhibit's shady past, and they just didn't care. In this scenario, maybe SkyMall's executives knew their company was headed for bankruptcy. Maybe they were looking for an out. And maybe, in this scenario, they wanted to go out with a bang. So what does this mean in plain speak? Well, at this point in 2013, SkyMall was basically a sinking ship, which is a dumb analogy to use for an airplane business, but I'm currently writing this at 3 a.m. And as we also know, pump and dumps are built on hype. And if Xhibit were to acquire SkyMall, this would add a lot of hype. And that it did. In May of 2013, SkyMall officially merged with the Xhibit Corporation, catapulting Xhibit's stock price up by a whopping 80%. Now, remember our boy Isaac? Well, in the public's eyes, this ends up putting a real fork in his whole pump and dump thesis. And all of a sudden, he has to start doing battle in his comments section because the SkyMall acquisition has now added legitimacy to Xhibit's portfolio. Don't understand how you can call this a pump and dump. Does the SkyMall merger change your opinion at all? In my opinion, it gives it some legitimacy. How's that short thesis of yours after the news today? Did anyone read the news? Think you called this one wrong, Isaac. Isaac, you called it wrong. This company is now huge and thriving. SkyMall is now under their management. All right, so when you read these comments with hindsight, it kind of makes you want to pull out your eyelashes, because it was now looking like a decent portion of the financial community was beginning to cast doubt on Isaac's theory. But throughout all of the criticism, even when the hype train was moving full steam ahead, Isaac held true to his claim and maintained his short position. And thank God he did, because vindication is one hell of a drug. Over the course of the next 2.5 months, Xhibit's stock price would plummet from an all-time high of $7 per share to an ultimate low of just $1. And if this market move was indeed the result of some elaborate pump and dump scheme, well, it was probably right around here where you could call it a success. But this didn't mean Xhibit was over. After all, they still did own SkyMall, and according to them, they were determined to save it. The following year, Xhibit would make a shocking statement when the company announced they had officially ended all operations of their software business to focus 100% on SkyMall, which was probably pretty easy to do since the majority of their software business arguably never existed. So, what was their first order of business? What was Xhibit's big plan to revitalize the SkyMall brand? Well, remember SkyMall's second business I mentioned? You know, the revenue stream that made up over 2/3 of the company's income and was arguably the only thing keeping SkyMall's boat afloat? Damn it, not again! Well, Xhibit sold it to pay off debt. But this makes no sense. Why would Xhibit shut down their software business, focus the entirety of their efforts to run SkyMall, and then immediately sell off the only part of the business that was actually making money? Well, I'm willing to speculate that Xhibit never had any intention of actually running SkyMall. They weren't going to steer it out of bankruptcy, diversify their revenue streams, or innovate their existing ones. My guess is they knew SkyMall was doomed from the very beginning. And now, they were going to gut it for all it was worth. And so, from 2014 to 2015, Xhibit sold off SkyMall's most valuable business, declared bankruptcy, and disappeared forever. Now, what do we make of this? When we look back at this chain of events, is it fair to assume that SkyMall's final years were just used to inflate the value of a sketchy tech company that was allegedly involved in a shady stock market scheme? And is it possible that the executives at SkyMall were in on it from the very beginning? Well, I can't say for sure. I'm also not a financial expert, and I would never make any direct accusations. But what I can say is that there are many people much smarter than me who agree that the whole thing just reeks, including the SEC, who eventually launched a private investigation of Xhibit in 2015. But the results of that fiasco seem to remain undisclosed. So what happened to SkyMall? Well, after declaring bankruptcy in 2015, a company by the name of CNA Marketing would purchase the trademark for a measly $1.9 million. Today, SkyMall operates just like any other online store, and while the company still holds true to their model of selling somewhat unorthodox products, the in-flight magazine has long since disappeared, and the business now feels more like just another generic dropshipping website than the established American icon it once was. Which is probably for the best. Maybe, much like the products it sold, SkyMall was just a novelty. A moment in an era of pop culture that has long since come and gone. And perhaps they had a lot more in common with Xhibit than I originally thought. Sure, on the outside, both companies looked impressive, exciting, and full of possibilities. But once you opened them up and took a closer look inside, you started to realize that what they were really selling was just a whole lot of junk. Except for the Garden Yeti. I like the Garden Yeti. I'm partial to the Garden Yeti. Had I been aware of its existence prior, I might have indulged myself. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've made it this far, thank you for your enthusiasm. Thank you for your time. Just want to let you guys know that we got a lot of stuff planned for this year. I got a second channel with my brother. If you didn't know about it, surprise, this is the big reveal. We talk about a bunch of goofy topics that are similar to what we do here on the main channel, and we have a lot of fun with it. Also, I just started testing out a live show where I talk about the weirdest and latest in brands and marketing that I'm trying to do every first and fourth Wednesday over on Twitch and YouTube. So that's it. Got a lot of stuff planned for this channel as well. Very excited about it. Take care. I miss you already, but I'll see you again very soon.